is important and part of the education piece to just differentiate. There are actually 5 different types of cannabis so far. One of them, we all know, marijuana, right? It has high THC and also other cannabinoids like CBD in it. So that's one thing, right? Only legal in, what is it? I think it's like 20 states now. That's one type of cannabis. Another type is CBD. So that's very low THC and higher in other cannabinoids like CBD. That is federally legal now. Then we have grain hemp, which is grown in more arid areas of the world, including Canada and like central plains of the US. That's a seed that also has super low THC or none, and very low CBD as well, but not none, but still very low percentages. And in some varieties probably have almost none. But so that's a high protein grain that's grown for food. And that's where your hemp milk, your hemp seed, your hemp breads, things like that come from. Side note, Canada is the number 1 supplier of hemp grain in the US is the number 1 buyer of Canada's hemp grain, and they, as of a year ago, were sitting on a pretty huge oversupply. So, I don't know, if the market for grain hemp is really going to be that profitable of one until some, US supply chain stuff gets worked out. But that can't really be grown reliably here in this part of the Midwest because of the same thing that I explained earlier about having high moisture in the fall. One thing that I learned out in Oregon was you can't grow seeds in a moist environment around harvest time, right? Because the seeds will actually start to sprout on the stalk. And that, you don't want moisture in your grain of any kind, whether it's seed or food or whatever. A large mass of seeds with moisture in it is going to be mold and rot and expensive to dry down. So there's the grain hemp, which is kind of a shorter, maybe like waist high product plant with a lot of grain, like the seed head up at the top. I didn't mention this before, but marijuana and CBD can be like very bushy, like a Christmas tree, with a single stem and branches with flowers, or like something smaller, like a bush, right? So they differ in that they also have really different spacing. So you grow grain, you grow a lot of it, and you grow it in rows really close together because you're harvesting it mechanically, right? And marijuana and CBD can be grown at large scale and harvested mechanically, but generally speaking, it's a smaller batched plant that's cared for by hand. Although there's examples of hundreds of acres of CBD being grown basically like a row crop. But anyway, then you have fiber hemp. Fiber hemp is kind of amazing and incredible, and I feel like it's going to have a completely different and much slower trajectory than CBD has had in terms of like building the market, building the infrastructure, getting it planted, figuring out how to grow it. Fiber hemp is also very low in CBD and THC and almost no THC. So very low risk for growers on that respect. But fiber hemp can grow to be 10 feet tall. Wow. And you plant fiber hemp depending on what market it's going towards, right? So the kind of components of the plant are the center of the stalk is this like pulpy white stuff called the hurd. And that is what goes into like pressed paper production, hempcrete, hemp plastics. There's thousands of products you can make from the inside of the plant cool. Stalk. The outside is called bast, B-A-S-T, and that's where the fiber comes from. So like, clothing, rope, thousands of products can be made from the bast of the plant. So, depending on what market you're growing for, although you do get some of each, no matter how you grow your fiber hemp, you plant your fiber hemp at different spacing. So if you are growing for bast and you're going to sell to, a manufacturer who's going to create a fiber that then becomes a fabric that goes to become Patagonia clothes, for example, you would plant your fiber hemp super close together, because then you would get skinny, spindly, tall plants and you get a ton of the fiber, right? The bast. If you were growing for hempcrete or paper or, hemp plastic, that's where you want that center component called hurd, and you would plant farther apart and you get like tree trunks. And then that then goes on to be processed, stripped from each other, and you get your hurd and your bast, and then further processing from there. So that's kind of the story of fiber hemp. And then the fifth kind of category, so to speak, of cannabis is like what we call in Wisconsin ditchweed. So it's like land-based cannabis. It's cannabis that has basically thrived and evolved on its own without human intervention or cultivation. And in our case, in this area of Wisconsin, we have a lot of ditchweed, landrace, whatever, wild hemp, basically, that has survived on its own despite the authorities' attempt to eradicate it, which they do have the authority to do and have tried to pull it out and burn it and cut it down and whatever for years. That's what's left over from the fiber industry that was number 2 in the country back in the 50s and beyond. So what happened was there was a prohibition on all kinds of cannabis that made growing fiber hemp illegal. This was like post-war time. So what happened was basically the cotton lobby came in and was like, marijuana is bad and it's related to fiber hemp. So this whole set of plants needs to be illegal because they're too close together. And plus they're, competing in our markets, and we want to take over on exploited. We want, so that happened. Marijuana prohibition knocked fiber hemp out as an industry, but because of the nature of the plant, in that there's male and female plants, no matter what type of cannabis, it basically survived. And over the past 70 years, it's been reseeding itself and evolving to survive on its own since then. So what that means is we have wild cannabis that grows. It looks like cannabis. It has cannabis leaves, but it has very dinky little flowers that can have as much as 3% THC in them in the wild, which is why the police want to get rid of them. However, from experience, for me, there's nothing positive about smoking ditchweed. It gives you a headache, right? It doesn't really have enough good cannabinoids. The reason that it has become so high in THC, because the function of THC in a cannabis plant is to protect the plant from pests and disease. So because we weren't there, cultivating it and caring for it, it's had to kind of combat all of those threats by itself. And that's why naturally over time, the THC has risen in the plant, basically as a self-protectant.